When I was a child, I would either go to my loft-type bedroom or I would head out into the garden. And if you can imagine quite a square garden, and around the perimeter were a lot of fruit trees, a lot that my dad and I planted, plus a veggie patch, a cubby house in the corner, canaries singing, and rose bushes. My mum loved roses. And of course, down the side of the house was my collection of critters, lizards, and other things. And I would find a spot to sit and I would dream of writing books. I would see them in my mind. And in school holidays, I would often set myself the task of writing booklets about whatever I was interested in: animals, archaeology, volcanoes, lizards, other things. And some of my school projects were actually like books. And some of the teachers were really encouraging. But my Year 12 English teacher, just before the exam, stood up in front of the class and referred to a piece I had written and said, "And Cate has no idea about writing." I went to university, and in the first degree, which was in occupational therapy, we had to do a thesis. By this time, I was interested in humans. And I chose to write about the psychosocial management of the adult with cancer. And my thesis was definitely a book. The panel of 3 people, one of them said to me that it was too good, so I must have taken my ideas from somewhere else. What she hadn't recognised was that at that time, not a lot had been written about this area, and I focused on the issue of loss and grief as being a major factor for people dealing with cancer. But life goes on. I had learnt a story, though, at that point. I'd learnt a story that it wasn't safe to put myself out there in my writing, basically. But off I went to more studies, more work. And in the year 2000, I had a Churchill Fellowship looking at the management of anxiety and depression. And when I came back, I had maintained contact with some of the people that I met overseas, and they were great mentors and they were very encouraging. And I'd identified an area where there was a gap in knowledge, and that gap was around preventing relapse of depression. So I undertook a PhD in that area. And some years later, out of the PhD, there was a book manuscript. One of those mentors I'd met on the Churchill actually marked the PhD. There was someone else in Australia. And he said this would be a good book. And so I got the courage to send the manuscript off to a publisher, and they picked it up. So I had rewritten the story of It's Not Safe to put myself out there in writing and become a published author. But what's this got to do with wellbeing? We all have lives where there's joys and there's challenges. And the last few years have been particularly challenging, and certainly it's still challenging on the world stage and at home. And we need to think about, what wellbeing actually involves. And there's different aspects to it. I'm going to focus on mental wellbeing because that's where my passion is. Mental wellbeing involves our psychological and social wellbeing, and for some people, spiritual wellbeing. But it's also influenced by our physical health, isn't it? And it's defined as, feeling good, functioning well, contributing to society, connecting with people, reaching our potential. So let's focus for a few moments on your wellbeing. There's a scale here from 0 to 5. So I would ask you all in your minds to reflect on where is your mental wellbeing currently, from 0, which is no mental wellbeing whatsoever, through to 5, the best it could be, the maximum. which number would you choose in your mind? And then, if you feel comfortable to, if we could have a show of hands for anyone who chose 0, 1 or 2. Okay, thank you. What about 3 or 4? Okay, fabulous. And any 5s? Okay. So a second question. Reflect on whether there's a gap between where your current level of mental wellbeing is and where you would like it to be. And perhaps a show of hands if there is a gap currently. Okay, so that's a common response. Okay, so what do we know about wellbeing? And you will be familiar with many of these things. There's a number of keys to wellbeing. And I'll just run through a few of them. One of them is looking after your physical health. And lifestyle in particular comes into that, doesn't it? What we eat, what we drink, how we sleep, and so on. Reducing stress. We live in a world with chronic stress. So reducing that stress level and practicing some self-care. Also living a life consistent with our values, what's important to you. And finding a sense of meaning and purpose in life is critical. Connecting with people. So this is a wonderful example of that. Having the skills to cope with worry and when our mood is a bit low. But also fostering positive emotions, some humour, awe, the beauty of the sunset, the violet, and gratitude in life. And finally, mindfulness and self-compassion. But what if there's more to wellbeing than that list? What if there's a missing key that might open the door to greater wellbeing? I've worked with people for over 40 years, studied and worked with people, talked to thousands of people in my roles in health. And one of the issues that I believe influences our wellbeing to quite a large extent are some of those stories that we tell ourselves in our minds about ourselves. And they're often self-critical. And often we use language in those stories that we wouldn't say to anyone else. And so I think one of the keys that may open a very heavy door at times to wellbeing is rewriting some of the stories about ourselves. I'm actually going to go back to the door for a minute. So Adelaide, some of you might be aware of a master therapist and social worker called Michael White. Hands up if anyone's, yeah. Sadly, he passed away, but he was internationally renowned for a therapy called narrative therapy. And more recently, I've been inspired by the work of Rita Sharon, who talks about story in medicine. And the way we make sense of the world and find meaning is through story and language. And what we actually do as we grow up, so from that child growing through the world, we pull together events and pieces of information that fit with particular stories about ourselves. And some will be positive and some will be negative. Some will be, what we're good at, what skills we have. But some will be very self-critical, perhaps about not being enough in some way. And if you imagine an umbrella above your heads that's gone with you all the way through life and is still there, it contains all of the influences, things like government, institutions, education, religion, family, friends, but also media is a huge one these days. And it's particularly important because as humans, for survival, we tend to both see the negative but also compare. So if there was a tiger roaming in through the door, we would want to think of the negative, we would want to compare. That tiger looks bigger than us, it looks hungrier than us, maybe it's not safe to be around the tiger. Whereas those people who go, oh, a lovely tiger, I might go and pat the tiger, may not survive. So we do this comparison thing, and that's what happens with social media a lot. I don't measure up to what I'm saying. So, stories. But if we're going to rewrite our stories as a key to well-being, we need a way of doing it, don't we? So what I would like to do is share with you 3 steps to, I hope, opening the door to greater well-being. So the first one is acknowledging some of those stories, being aware of them. You know, what do you tell yourself in your mind? Sometimes it's just automatic little thoughts that pop in, or perhaps it's a story you tell yourself a lot of the time. And often it's stories, as I said, about not quite measuring up, often self-critical language. So be aware, acknowledge. You may want to write these down on a piece of paper or on the phone, because maybe they'll come back, be useful to come back to. Secondly, recognise that although you've gone through life privileging certain events and pieces of information to create these stories, there are always exceptions. There are always exceptions. Things that people have actually said that are positive to you. Small achievements, big achievements. Perhaps when you've had to use a strength, an internal resource to get through something. They're the exceptions. And they lead the way to an alternative story. It's a bit like panning for gold. I don't know if anyone's ever been to Ballarat or somewhere where they've panned for gold, and you pick up the sand, shake the pan. Hopefully, there are some little flecks of gold. So that's what you're looking for in your life, in your stories. Where are the flecks of gold? And then thirdly, rewriting that alternative story, bringing in those flecks of gold. So I shared with you how I rewrote that story of it not being safe to I can write, I am an author. And when I was researching the women's book, I read some of Ash Barty's book, her memoir, My Dream Time. And she said sometimes there were 2 voices in her mind. And we often talk about a negative voice as being an inner critic. And she had an inner critic that would say, Ash, you're not good enough. But there was another voice that would say, Ash, you are enough, you can do it. And she said there was often a battle between the 2, and sometimes one won out over the other. So no one is immune to this. Even the most successful people have to deal with this. Recently, I went to a workshop where the facilitator was Louis Mel Madrona, who's a Canadian physician of Italian and Native American descent. And he's very big on using narratives in medicine. And we had to do an exercise at the start in pairs. And the first thing we had to do was write a story about how we came to be at the conference. And then we shared our stories, so each person read their story out loud to each other. And then the second part of the exercise was, we'd listen to the other person's story. Then we had to retell the story as though they were a hero in their own story. They could have been Superman or Superwoman or Harry Potter or whoever. And it was actually a really powerful story, powerful exercise. And it led to me reflecting on much of the work that I've done and many of the clients I've worked with who I believe have been heroes in their own stories. And I reflected on one woman I worked with many years ago, actually when I was doing medicine, but in the holidays I would do locums as an OT. And she was referred because of depression. And she'd had a neurological event, I'll call her Mary, and Mary was in a wheelchair, unable to use her right arm. She had a teenage son, and at the core of the depression was that she believed she could not be an adequate mum anymore to her teenage son. And so we talked about things she might be able to do, and in those days OT worked through activities. And the son had bought an old bomb of a car. So I suggested she bring in the number plates. And she brought them in and they were very tatty. But she spent a number of sessions at the table with the number plates clamped to the table, talking to the others, cleaning them, painting them meticulously. And at the end they looked beautiful. And her whole demeanour changed, her depression lifted, because her story had changed from being incapable to still being able to be a great mum. And so to finish, I might actually do this as a bit of a meditation, if you would want to participate. Otherwise, you can just listen. It's only short, Meredith, so it won't take too long. So if you would want to listen, just do that. Otherwise, what you can do is sit with your feet on the floor, hands on your lap, and you can close your eyes or you can look at a spot in front of you. It's up to you. So as you sit there quietly, be aware of your feet on the floor and notice how they feel. You may notice the shoes touching your feet or the sense of the ground underneath the soles of your shoes. And hands on your lap or near you, you may notice what they're touching. The feel of the cloth in your trousers or skirt, or maybe touching another hand. And you might even like to take a couple of medium breaths in and out down to your tummy. And my hope is that you might have found a key today to open the door to greater well-being. I invite you to reflect for a few moments about some of the stories that you have developed along the way and to consider how you might have already rewritten them, or perhaps how you might follow those 3 steps to rewrite them. Acknowledging the stories, recognising the gold, the exceptions, and rewriting the story, creating that alternative story. By doing so, you open the door to greater well-being and flourishing in life. And Marianne Williamson wrote, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people the permission to do the same. So please let your own light shine. Remember that you are enough, and in fact you are the hero in your own story." And again, be aware of your feet on the ground, hands on your lap. Be aware of any sounds around. Gradually have a stretch and a wriggle and open your eyes. Thank you.